Mark Bucinich for City Limits. To my left, Charlene Obernauer. She is the executive director for the New York Committe for Occupational Safety and Health, and we're right here in the middle of Wall Street where money never sleeps, right, Charlene? But Charlene, thanks for your time. We wanted to ask you, why is it important to keep the scaffold safety law here in New York City and New York State strong?
The scaffold safety law is really a piece of legislation that protects construction workers and protects all New Yorkers, just members of the general public who may be walking by a construction site. What it really does is make sure that construction workers are protected on the job, and that if there is an injury or a fatality on the job, that the construction worker can then hold the company that put that person at risk accountable. So, there are laws that govern how safety and health needs to work on construction sites, just as there are laws that drivers need to obey when they're driving their car. And unfortunately, when we did an analysis of construction fatalities, and we looked at every time there is some kind of an inspection, OSHA finds that 2/3 of the time in construction, in any kind of inspection that they do, 2/3 of the time there is a violation. So that means that a lot of companies are operating where they see OSHA violations as just the cost of doing business, and because the maximum fine that you can get with OSHA is $70,000 for a willful violation. So for some contractors, especially when they're mostly just looking at serious violations, that's just the cost of doing business. However, the scaffold law, which allows individuals to sue the employer if there is any kind of violation of health and safety law and the person is injured as a result, that really is something that needs to be kept in place, because the other fines that we have just are not significant enough for this to be an incentive for employers to follow the law.
Now, Charlene, the industry, if you go to, for example, scaffoldlaw.org, that particular website, and they're just one of a few. There are other organizations, mostly in the insurance industry and the construction industry, that are distributing information about, well, the scaffold law actually is hurtful to everybody in New York City and New York State. It hurts small businesses, it even hurts taxpayers, and if it were reformed, that it would actually create more jobs and more economic opportunity. What's your rebuttal to that?
When you look at how the scaffold law benefits not only the person who's injured on the job, but also how it benefits taxpayers, when a person's injured on the job, if they're at a construction site and they can sue the employer because the employer broke the law in terms of health and safety regulations, and that individual sues the employer, then that individual is no longer going to be accessing workers' compensation necessarily. They're not going to be accessing other social services because they're able to engage in a lawsuit. So actually, the argument that the scaffold law hurts small business and hurts taxpayers, really the opposite is true. Without the scaffold law, it would really be more dangerous for workers, but it would also cost the taxpayers more money.
So you're saying it's opposite of what the industry is saying. The industry is saying that if the law is reformed, it'll save taxpayers money, but you're saying it would not.
Absolutely, because taxpayers are responsible for paying into workers' compensation costs. And if a worker gets injured on the job and their employer is held liable, then that worker is not going to be accessing workers' compensation. So at the end of the day, it's actually beneficial to the taxpayer that we have the system in place, because they're not paying when a worker gets injured on the job and the employer broke the law that resulted in that person's injury. And that's really the correlation. It's the employer breaks the law, the worker then has the right to sue their employer.
Charlene.